Welcome back to the tea party. We're not quite all mad here yet, and today I'd like to share with you my top 6 sewing tools. I don't necessarily have a make to share. I did do a wearable mock-up of a 50s skirt, and I'll share details on that throughout the video. I'll also include info in the description if you're interested in it as well. The pattern I used is a free pattern, and I loved it. It was a great pattern. So more info below. But let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of the video. Now, I've ranked these items in order of most awesome to still awesome, but not as awesome as number 1. So let's go ahead and start with a seam guide. And this is magnetic. If you've never worked with something like this before, it came with this little template that has holes that you slide under the needle on your sewing machine. And I actually like to put my presser foot on top of it and thread the needle through the hole of the seam allowance I'm aiming for. And then this little magnetized doodad goes on your sewing plate on your machine, and you'll have the specified length. Once you take this out, this stays on your machine, and then whatever you're sliding through there is going to have the seam allowance that you measured out here. Now, you don't necessarily have to use this type. There are other types, but this is just what I happen to have. If it's still sold, I'll link it below. I did get it from Amazon, but I got it a really long time ago. So if it's still there, I'll link it, but this is great. And if anybody says anything to you about this is cheating, you don't need that kind of negativity in your life. Next up is a measurement device that has centimeters on it. This is the standard ruler that I use, and it breaks down into like quarter-inch measurements and what's in between the quarters. This is fine, but sometimes when you're trying to do like an alteration, you might need to break it down a little more granular than that. And so if you're trying to work with something that needs that, but you don't have that marked down on your tool, I like to hop over to centimeters and work with something that has that on it instead. Now this tape has both, and ideally I probably need to get something stiff that I can use that has centimeters on it, but I think the standard like wood school rulers actually have metric measurements on them, so that would probably be fine as well. And I like the wood ones because you can write on them and then erase it later, just saying. So highly recommend something that has metric on it to get more granular when you're just trying to math with inch fractions and the math isn't mathing. Next, let's talk rotary cutters. Now, there's nothing wrong with scissors, and I have lots of scissors, but when it comes to cutting out a pattern, I think these are so much faster. And also when you're cutting the fabric, like to fit your pattern, right? And I treat these like I treat my scissors. I have paper cutting rotary cutters, and I have fabric cutters. So this is something cheap, a Pioneer Woman from Walmart. Again, I know we're trying to not buy things. I've had these for a while. Just get something cheap. The only thing I would say is don't do this. Don't get these little itty bitty ones, because when you're trying to follow a line to make a cut with these itty bitty ones, it's just too hard to see the line as you go, and you're going to end up making a mistake. Don't do the little ones. Do the larger ones. It seems counterintuitive, but it's just so much better. Now let's talk pins. And if you guys can't see this, I'll put a picture in the video. But these are pins that have glass tops. These are specifically for quilting, so I don't know if you have to buy quilting pins to get this, but what's great about these is they're iron friendly. If you try to press over the pins that have the plastic tops on them, you run the risk of melting those, and that sounds really awful to clean off of your iron. So highly recommend the glass top ones. And these are super long, again, because they're for quilting. I don't even necessarily need the length. It's just the fact that the glass tops are on them that makes these so great. Next up, let's talk about the pattern. And in this case, for this project, it was a free pattern. It's one of Gertie's patterns. And when you find a pattern maker that does a phenomenal job, stick with them. It's a real crapshoot sometimes when you're buying patterns from people online, because you really never know what you're going to get. But if that free pattern is any indicator of what the rest of her patterns are like, I feel like they're worth the purchase. It had the grain lines marked out, it had pivot points on it, which I had actually never seen that before, not on patterns purchased from independent creators. So I appreciated that so much. And then on top of that, on top of the pattern being free, she also has a YouTube video that's like a sew along. So if you wanted to follow that video through the process while you're doing it, which is what I did, there's no way to mess it up. It's so easy to understand. And circle skirts, if you're in straight sizes, you can even go online and find calculators for those. But as a plus size person, I wanted a pattern because it gets too tricky trying to get into the whole fabric requirements. The last item of the top 6 is this bad boy. What is this? This is a pressing sheet. This is great when you're working with like a fusible interfacing, something that has adhesive on it, because you can lay your project down on your ironing board, place this on top, and you're not going to run the risk of like scalding your glue, because I feel like there's potential to have the glue get too hot and maybe soak into the opposite side of your fabric where you don't want it. This also protects your iron if that were to happen. So I've used this a ton since I purchased it. And it came in this little tube. It's not very large, but it's really awesome. And what I like to do is, because I've accidentally fused things to the top of my ironing board before. So I like to lay down a piece of parchment paper first, then I put whatever I'm going to be pressing, and then I put this pressing sheet. I don't use this all the time, only when I'm working with something super duper delicate that I don't want to burn with my iron, or something that has adhesive involved, because I don't want to have to clean that off of my iron. Now, there were a few items that were honorable mentions, and one of those is a misting spray bottle. I don't put water in my iron ever because it can mineralize and clog the iron up, especially if you're not using distilled water all the time, and I can't be bothered with that. So I just keep a separate spray bottle on hand, and I mist whatever I need to steam and then move on with pressing. I just find this easier for me in terms of maintenance. I also want to talk about this, pencils, right? And so many people think that you have to have special markers or certain chalk, or a lot of people work with chalk and there's no problem with that. I use Taylor's chalk fairly often, but I prefer to use pencils because I've never had a problem with pencil washing out. I can control the level of darkness pretty easily with how much pressure I put when I'm drawing. And it's just so accessible. Everybody has pencils. So spending money on special things to write on your I've heard stories of people that use those pens or markers to do their stuff, like they're made for doing that, but sometimes they have issues with it showing back up if they put something in the dryer, or whatever they marked on, the ink didn't come out. So I'm a pencil girl. That's all I had for you today. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in more content about sewing, self-awareness, I'm doing a no-buy right now, or just some fantasy geek millennial lady and her cat, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be uploading most Fridays, and I'll see all of you ethereal little dumplings again real soon. Bye! I just find this easier for me in terms of